our last panel here after a great day of discussion. They queued us up perfectly on the last one, talking about the Olympics, thinking ahead to the future. I think the last panel is fitting to think about technology and how it will transform transportation here in LA in the future. I'm really excited for this panel. We have a great range of perspectives and people with a lot of deep expertise and experience on transportation technology and a lot of the topics we were talking about earlier. Brief introduction for myself. My name is Jarrett Catlin. I'm a communications and public affairs consultant, previously at a place called Tusk Strategies, now out on my own. And excited to have each person. I'm going to go around the horn, let them briefly introduce themselves before we dive into our discussion. So John, would you like to take it away?
Sure, thanks, Jared. First of all, I want to just commend Pete Peterson and your team at the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine for putting on this really terrific afternoon discussion. That's, I think, a very important discussion for this city and this region. So my name is John Rassat. I'm the founder and CEO of an LA company called Commotion. We organize a big conference every November here in LA for the past 7 years on the future of mobility, the future of urban mobility, all the different ways we're going to get around cities in the future. We're committed, our mission, our goal is that cities should aspire to a kind of seamless multimodality for all, using various different kinds of modes of mobility, sustainable, that work together, so getting from point A to point B is as painless as possible. My previous life, a long, long time ago, I was in the press, mostly in Europe and the Middle East. I was one of the editors of I was the Europe editor of Business Week magazine in its heyday. I then left and joined a big French company and ultimately wound up running a big subsidiary in Geneva, which put me in charge of putting together the World Economic Forum in Davos for quite a few years. While I was doing that, I was really more and more focused intellectually on how cities were developing and the impact of digital technologies on city building. And then that led me to start my own nonprofit group called the New Cities Foundation about 15 years ago. When you look at cities, you very quickly arrive at the mobility piece, which then kind of became all-consuming passion of mine, and I wrote a book about it. And we started, about 12 years ago at the foundation, a very high-level group, small conference of about 200 people on the future of urban mobility, which we did first in Mountain View because Google was a big backer at that time, and then in London and Tokyo. Then we got to LA, and just very briefly, it was an extraordinary moment about 9 years ago. There was the passage of Measure M. It was Eric Garcetti saying that Los Angeles' mission in the world was to be the capital of transportation technology. It was Salita Reynolds at the Department of Transportation. So we moved this small conference to LA. We built it out and created Commotion. And here I am. So.
Wonderful. David?
I'm David Zipper. I live in Washington, D.C., so thank you for giving me a chance to leave Washington, D.C. for a few days and join you here in L.A., which is a city that I don't pretend to be an expert on at all, but it is a fascinating place, and I've really enjoyed being here for a few days. I am a senior fellow at the MIT Mobility Initiative, sort of like the hub for all things transportation happening across MIT, although I'm based in D.C. And although I have experience working within City Hall in D.C. and in the Bloomberg administration in New York, I actually went into venture capital, working on smart cities and transportation. And perhaps unlike John, I got pretty disillusioned with the idea of technology being held up as a near panacea for a lot of our transportation challenges. And really for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been doing a variety of different things, especially writing. I've written over 200 articles now, I'm contributing writer at Vox and City Lab, sort of challenging narratives about technology's role fixing our transportation problems, whether that's autonomous vehicles, whether that is ride hail, whether that's flying cars, or technology's role in our road safety crisis. I am I would hope it's a healthy skepticism about the necessity of having these dialogues revolve around technology as opposed to planning and policy.
Very good. My name is Alyssa Walker. I came here from my house just a few miles away on the bus, go Metro. I've been a journalist here writing about transportation and housing and climate policy for about 20 years. The piece that Pete quoted from this morning, I wrote that when I was an urbanism editor at Curbed. Now I have a newsletter named Torched, and it's not what you think it's about, but it's newly relevant with everything that's happened over the last few weeks. I cover LA's mega event era and the planning decisions, or lack of decisions, that are being made leading up to 2028 and the Olympic and Paralympic Games and everything else that's coming. I have a bunch of stickers in my bag here. Some of them say, so LA doesn't get burned. You can decide if those are still appropriate for you to have, but happy to give you all these when you're after the panel.
See her at the merch table outside after it's sunny
Yeah.
out. Yeah. Well, yeah, yes, and yeah, follow the newsletter, please do. To start off, David, you talked about your own journey. You nodded to that in your view of technology. But I'd love to just take kind of the temperature of the room for each of you on your optimism or pessimism towards the ability of technology to positively transform transportation. And I ask that because my own relationship to transportation tech started about a decade ago. I wrote a dissertation on e-scooters. This is the era of e-scooters and Hyperloop and flying cars and drone delivery and a lot of frothy excitement. And then since then the mood has shifted and it comes in waves. I'm sure all of you have seen various waves of excitement or hype cycles, depending on how you want to term it. But I'd love for each of you to just kind of take a chance and say, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the impact of technology to positively impact urban transportation? I know, David, you already nodded to it, but I'd love for each of you to take a chance. Alyssa, you want to start? David's,
Well, yeah, I was going to say, David and I were at this press event a couple of years ago.
That's where we met.
Yeah, that's where we
Oceanside.
met the first time, and it was for a car company. Maybe we don't have to name them, maybe we do, but they were testing one of these. They all have these different ideas now for how they're going to protect pedestrians or bicyclists by using their technology, their proprietary technology. And we were both very skeptical, and we were kind of in the room of these like automotive journalists. They probably will never ask me back, and probably not David, because of the questions we were asking. So very, very skeptical that the car companies can come up with the solution to stop killing the people that they are killing on our roadways. Is a really good example. And to his point, policy and brave leadership from elected officials can get us almost all of the way there when it comes to solving a lot of these problems, but we don't see a lot of that, especially in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, like, who's the most famous transportation innovator of the last 20 years? Elon Musk. I would argue, is he solving problems of our country right now? I'll let you decide. And I think you probably can guess already based on what I think. But I think it's actually a pretty important point. He's been held up as the paragon of transportation innovation, and look what he's doing to the country now. By the way, just today he announced he's going to the FAA next. Also today, we had the third airline incident under the Trump presidency where, I don't know if you saw this, happened like 2 hours ago in Seattle. A Japan Airlines plane ran into a Delta Airlines plane on the runway. Nobody, I think, was injured. But, I'm not very confident that DOGE being deployed on the FAA is going to lead us into a new world of transportation safety.
Well, it's obviously because of diversity hiring.
I mean, it goes without saying at this point.
Yeah.
Don't say a bunch of us didn't try to warn you all.
Yeah, that's also true.
Transportation journalists are feeling very vindicated right now.
Yeah, well, but I guess I'll say it. So I do think, and if you guys are not familiar with the work of Peter Norton, who's a historian at the University of Virginia, I really encourage checking it out. He wrote a book called Autonorama about how really there's been, for a century, there are these 20-year cycles where particularly the automotive industry holds up this utopian tech-based vision of the world where it's just over the next horizon. We'll have this technology that if we just let the car companies do it, that we'll get rid of car crashes and get rid of pollution, whatever problem it is du jour, and then 20 years happens and it hasn't, of course, you basically just move the goalpost further out another 20 years. So I think there's some real problems in basing an expectation of societal improvement on transportation companies and technology companies. We can talk more about that. That said, I don't want to just be a hater. I mean, I'm happy being mostly a hater, but I will say that there are particular transportation innovations that I think are really powerful. Think of e-bikes, think of bike share, which you called the best innovation of the 2010s, as I recall.
That's right, David.
I know you did, yeah. And I think of mini cars, which we stupidly ban, like K cars, from coming into this country. I think of automatic speed limiters, intelligent speed assist that California State Senator Scott Wiener tried to require here in California, and Newsom vetoed it. There are innovations that can do real good, but the reasons that we're not capitalizing on these innovations, as far as I can tell, is not that we need like engineers to work harder, it's we need policymakers to grow a backbone and actually fully capitalize on them. So that's why I put the focus on policy and on planners much more so than on asking more from our tech companies.
A healthy a dose of skepticism to start, John. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I would be classified as much more of a tech optimist than you, David, or you, Alyssa.
I set a high bar.
And yeah, but I have tremendous respect for what you've done, David, which was to say, why the hell are we looking at these sort of sophisticated, over-the-hill technologies when the answers are kind of at hand? And let's, if we can provide kind of simple solutions for some of these problems without resorting to technology. That said, I really love technology, and I think that we're in a absolutely transformative phase of our history as human beings in terms of what's coming down the pike with artificial intelligence, et cetera, and that will transform the way we get around cities. If you think about transit lines and the last mile, getting from a transit stop to your home that's half a mile away from the transit stop. We can now have all sorts of dynamic micro transit solutions to do that depend on artificial intelligence. So that's going to be something really interesting. However, if you take, for example, flying cars, and everybody likes to scoff at that, and it's not a solution to our transportation woes in LA or probably anywhere else. It will serve a very small minority of the population, but I love that technology. I think it's really cool. We need to clean up the air, just as we need to clean up terrestrial transportation. But there's a bigger issue, I think, for LA in particular. And LA, in my view, and I'm not an Angelino at heart, I was born on the East Coast, but LA for me has always been the city of movement. Whether it's space, whether it's the movement of goods, we have the ports with all the goods coming in from all around the world. It's our freeways. You love them, you hate them. It's moving vast amounts of people. It's really about movement more than any other city in the world. And there's a big economic dimension of that, and that is Rich Florida earlier talked about LA based on entertainment. That's not true. We're a very diversified economy. The industry of mobility is really important for LA, and I think it will be more and more important in the future. So yes, we may scoff at advanced air mobility and flying cars, but as an Angelino, I really like the idea that our city is the hub of that. Our city it's where micromobility was birthed in Santa Monica in 2017 when Bird kind of came out from nowhere and developed that technology. So I would like to see that, as a Angelino, I want to see that stay here and develop, because I think we can be, as Eric Garcetti used to say, in fact, the transportation technology capital of the world. We're not really, but I think it's something we should aspire to. That creates amazing jobs. I think it's good for everybody, and that's sort of what we also would like to push at Commotion every year.
Thank you. So, at the risk of letting former researcher show, defining our terms up front, right? I think what do we talk about when we're talking about transportation technology? It was one of the questions I was thinking about coming into this. And sometimes people assume we're exclusively talking about the bleeding edge type of new mode that's being pushed by a technology company, a startup. But a lot of the active debate that you all have already hinted at is how much should we focus on the latest and greatest versus sticking to the fundamentals of proven, time-tested measures and methods. So, I mean, John, starting with you, you talk to a lot of city leaders and tech companies as well. You host CoMotion and broker a lot of these conversations. Where do you draw the lines on transportation tech, and then how do you think cities should balance between the new and the established?
That's a tough one, Jared. But I'll go back, I'll sort of reference what we try to do at CoMotion. And that is, if you go to CoMotion LA or CoMotion Miami, literally half the speakers, half the audience is public sector, the other half is private sector. And we know that mobility takes place in the public right of way. Mobility and transportation will always be and must be a highly regulated industry. I mean, you can dial back on the regulation, but it has to be regulated. You can't go as fast as you want on a street, obviously.
Not anymore. Not with Elon Musk in charge. You do whatever you want.
Well, that's okay. So I think, what's interesting going forward is sort of the interplay between public and private. So what is interesting is that I would say up until 2017, 2018, the public city officials were basically not at all tech savvy. And there was not a level playing field between private industry and public and policymakers. I think in part what happened with Uber, what happened with Bird has changed that. And so starting with LA, and now it's spread to every city in the country, if not the world, we're having public officials who really understand technology, which is I think is really useful. So I think this is sort of the next phase of where we're at, is there's much more of a meaningful dialogue between public and private, which can sort of help move things along.
Curious others, the view of balancing the new with the established. How do you think cities should think about that? I know it's something you both have written about.
Respectfully, I think it's the wrong question. I think
Tell me more.
that the question that cities should start with is, what's the problem you're trying to solve for? Is it you're trying to address equitable mobility disparities? Is it you're trying to reduce emissions from transportation? What's the problem? And then once you've defined your problem, then figure out what is the most cost-effective way of addressing that problem. Sometimes it's going to be doing something in a more emphatic or deeper way that you've already been doing, like building more bike lanes than you've been doing before. Sometimes the most cost-effective way of doing things might be trying something new, like adopting a new technology and seeing if it works, because there's a reasonable hypothesis that if it does work, it's now the more cost-effective way of addressing that problem. But I feel like there is a very bad habit of city officials sort of chasing FOMO, like they don't want to be missing out on the latest technology innovation. So they're like, let's just try this. And frankly, then the tech companies feed into this. Like, hey, we have the latest and greatest. Don't you want to deploy it first in Culver City or wherever it is? And then you sort of have this synergy there where it sort of works on both sides to focus on the tech rather than starting with the first order question. So I really dislike starting with the technology question, saying what's the line? I think you should start with the right question. And by the way, this applies to big stuff. I would argue that autonomous, robotaxis are a solution in search of a problem. I just interviewed Jeffrey Tumlin, the head of SFMTA, until this month, until January, asking is it a positive or negative for the regional transportation network to have so many robotaxis running around San Francisco? And he was like, I have not been able to figure out any net benefit to the transportation network or to society of having all of these Waymos and Cruises. Can't figure it out. I think that's a really damning conclusion to come from the guy who has been probably the most closely involved with robotaxis in the country. maybe Waymo's here in LA or doing something good, they're not, it's clearly not starting from the point of like, here's the problem and robotaxis are the optimal solution for it. It's not safety, because there's a hell of a lot of other ways to achieve safety outcomes that are more effective, more reliable, and cheaper than relying on robotaxis. To me, that is a solution in search of a problem to solve.
I mean, Waymo's a good example, though, because, and I do think something that John has done really well is, I think you let the public sector people go for free to CoMotion. So So it's flooded with tons of people who would otherwise not be exposed to these conversations about what's coming, and people get to see. I just remember all the stuff that you see now. It was the first time a lot of people saw it was at CoMotion. Even that weird little like suitcase that follows you around the airport. That really hasn't taken off yet, but it's like the delivery like little robots that you see like going around. Those were all at CoMotion first. You get to see the future. But I think the thing about the public employee or the public sector, they don't understand how the technology works. So Waymo's a really good example. They just show up here because it's regulated at the state level. It has nothing to do with anything that LA could do or not do to say that they're allowed to be here. So we have our transportation committee at LA City Council meeting, and it's 5 people who don't understand the technology, don't understand what Waymo is or does. They don't understand how it works. They don't understand the issues maybe in San Francisco. They don't even know how they can regulate it personally because they weren't prepared for it to show up. They just had a lobbyist maybe come to their office and tell them, oh, look at all these great things that we do. So I don't even know if you can argue that like policy can get ahead of it because the companies are so powerful now and they have such a grip on one level above whatever you're trying to mandate and build infrastructure for in your own city. But it's almost like a tech literacy issue when you come to making policy, and then we don't have any leadership from the city or county at this level, like talking about what is the benefit.
Well, we tried to do our little bit to reverse that, and it goes back to what you were saying, David. At CoMotion over the last 4 years, I think one of the most popular features of what we do, whether it's here in LA or Miami, is we have sessions where the public sector pitches to the private sector rather than the other way around, so we reverse it. And so it's basically, Jeff Tumlin saying, this is our problem in San Francisco, this is what we need, anybody have a solution? And rather than, tech purveyors coming, hey, we have this really shiny gadget that, can help solve all sorts of things. So we felt that, a lot of people have told us that the feedback we've been getting is that it's really quite useful.
Alyssa, a question for you. Your newsletter and your writing is premised on the excitement around and the build up towards the 28 Olympics and the other mega events, World Cup and a Super Bowl. And prior to these fires, we've heard people talk about it earlier today, that the rhetoric around transportation in LA focused on this really unique generational moment that we're living through between the Measure M funding, between the 28 by 28 transportation initiatives, and all these exciting events coming up. What do you think is the importance of this moment? Do you agree with that framing, first off? And then second off, what do you think is the most important set of decisions that are being made in this time running up to these big events?
Are there being decisions made is the question. I mean, what you will hear, the 2 big themes around the mega events are, and this goes for the World Cup too, in a sense, but it's the no-build games, right? So we don't have to build anything. Private sector has stepped in to build all of our stadiums. They look great. They'll work just fine. We could host everything tomorrow if we wanted to. But the other aspect of it is, what's the experience of the people who are coming to either compete or spectate? And actually get around the city, and what's that going to be like? And that is not a good experience right now. And we are working off of a pretty old plan in a way, because 28 by 28 was proposed in 2017, right after we got the bid. So we're working towards this long-range, plan that was boosted by Measure M at the time. That was great timing, so we can build things like the subway all the way to, Westwood. Hopefully, it's not a sure thing. It's not. We might be busing people that last, segment in 2028. It's fine. It'll be fine if we have buses. But we are operating under a series of plans that are just really just Metro saying, well, yeah, we're doing our best, guys, but we need a lot of help from the cities. And places like Santa Monica are doing a great job. Places like Long Beach are doing a great job. But the city of LA has no plan to move people around on bike, on foot, widen sidewalks, bike paths, bus lanes. They talk about bus lanes a little bit. And now we have the fires happening. So we are in I feel like a broken record. I just say this all the time. I hope somebody will eventually listen to me. But we can't even serve people on a daily basis, getting people around the region in an effective and safe and efficient and climate-friendly way. How are we going to do it when millions more people are here? So you might go to a beautiful stadium, you go SoFi, you step out. How are you getting home? People walk for miles to get home from games because the transit system has basically collapsed. That's not Metro's fault. That's the city of Inglewood's fault. Sorry.
On that happy note. I mean, look, this region, it's been stated many times, and we're the most jurisdictionally challenged, region in the country, I think, and we pay a very steep price for that. Will that governance piece get better? I doubt it. It's, how do you give, the mayor's office of LA suddenly real power? LA with, this city budget is a little over $10 billion a year, which is bupkis. The budget of New York City is well over $100 billion. So you have this kind of powerless city government, one of 88 municipal, you know the story better than anybody. So that's a tough one, yeah.
David, earlier you were talking about state the problem first, then fill in the solution. And a problem that, from Schwarzenegger on, well before that, everyone's agreed, carbon emissions, sustainability, that's kind of the looming problem when it comes to transportation. And obviously, electric vehicles is being served as the primary solution to that. But beyond electric vehicles, starting with David and others, what technology, if any, do you see as has our best chance of helping reduce carbon emissions?
Electric vehicles are going to have to be central to addressing climate change without question. But there's lots of studies that show that if the goal is to keep temperature increases under a 2% rise, even if we have the most bullish uptake rates projected from EVs, which in the current administration doesn't feel the most likely scenario, even then, we're not actually going to get there just from EV adoption alone. There has to be mode shift. There has to be, or just less driving, period. So there are a couple of things that can be done there. Like you're asking which modes. I actually would back up and say, one solution is just build denser, so people don't have to travel so freaking far to go where they want to go. That's not even a mode. That's just like thinking about land use, which is so important in places that have a lot of single-family homes, which I know is not at all relevant for Southern California.
It's still, you have to give some credit where credit's due, and I think the landscape is starting to change. I mean, whether it's granny flats or, commercial units tomorrow, or really the beginnings of transit-oriented development in LA, it is starting to happen. And, it's
you
way
live here,
too slow.
Yeah. You're the one, you live here. I mean, you know more than I do. But I think that a region like this that is, I'd say, like nationally famous for its single-family housing in some of the most productive, valuable areas. Like I was just driving around or biking around Venice, and like it's beautiful. The bungalows are like nice and cute, and they cost how many millions of dollars? I have no idea. 3 million. Thank you. So basically, forcing people to drive so much, which land use thing is a big part of. And then as you do that, that actually enables the various technologies or other modes that can provide a viable alternative for car use. So that can be transit, it can be e-bikes. And I would actually argue like a really useful thing to do is to install something like the bus-mounted automatic cameras, which I believe LA Metro is now using.
We have we're testing in 2 places, yeah.
Yeah, where basically like, like the bus rapid transit is phenomenal as a way of making transit more effective and faster and more reliable. But if you have one guy who parks in the the bus lane to run out and grab a cup of coffee, then you create basically why even have the lane in the first place. So there's this technology that basically installs cameras in the bus to take photos of the car that is blocking the bus lane, have a ticket be issued to the person in New York City, where there's a lot more in use than in LA. The majority of people who get a ticket don't get a second one. They change their behavior, and the bus goes faster. So that's the example of it's not an unbelievably innovative technology. Again, this is where I come back to, like, what's the big obstacle of adopting it? Like, it requires, I understand it, required moving heaven and earth to get Sacramento to let LA use it on, what, 2 lines?
I think that's changed. I mean, a lot of that's changed. Same with speed cameras.
It was a few years ago.
Yeah,
I mean,
things are changing in that sense. But I mean, just to point out, like, it's not like people aren't riding transit. Our ridership on Metro has gone up for 25 months straight, like in a row. It's probably with the fires maybe dipped a little bit in January. But then again, it was free most of January, so people were riding it maybe more because sometimes people ride it more when it's free. But it's not like people aren't riding the buses and trains. It's that how, despite, or they're riding them, in these very treacherous conditions. It's very dangerous to cross the street to get to the bus stop in my neighborhood, right? So what can we do to help? If we just did a little bit more as a region to help people get to transit or to be able to ride their bike, safely to get, we would explode as a region when it comes to transit.
I don't doubt that at all. Just say, but looking nationally, it's very clear that if we're talking about climate, then we're trying to get people to take transit instead of driving. And there's lots of other important stuff around safety, which is what you're referring to there in terms of helping to make sure the first last mile is safe. If the goal is to get people to ride transit, it's very clear it's about speed and reliability and frequency.
Right.
That's what matters. That's why the bus route, those cameras really matter. That's why BRT really matters. That's why the frequency of service really matters. What doesn't matter is whether it's free or not, actually. Hate to say it to some, but it's true. So that actually is why I focus so much. If we're talking about climate, find ways to make transit service more abundant, frequent, and reliable. That is the ticket, I would
John?
I agree, but let me stand up a little bit for technology also, because I think technological innovation also has to continue. For example, I happen to believe that we're really at the beginning of this innovation cycle around hydrogen technology. And I mention that because, one, California is the most hydrogen-forward state in the nation. 2, if you look at heavy-duty trucking, out of the ports of LA and Long Beach, it's, like a third or a half of all U.S. imports. They arrive in the ports and then are trucked out on the Alameda corridor. Now, if you happen to live around there,
diesel death lanes or whatever the term is.
There are just extraordinary cases of, high cancer rates. I mean, the particulate pollution alone from trucking is just enormous. It's horrible. That cannot electrify because just physics batteries are too big and heavy on a big truck. So that will, if you want to decarbonize that, which I think we must, and we must clean it up, you have to go to hydrogen. Yes, it's problematic. It's maybe 10 years out. It's maybe 20 years out. But it's something that will depend on technological breakthroughs. And I think that will, when that happens, that will be very good for our societies and our cities.
At the risk of oversimplification, there's this conflict that we've hinted at before between tech startups and cities. Startups feeling like cities are too slow, they're too bureaucratic. Cities feeling like the startups don't recognize the need for equity, accessibility, or safety, some of these other core concerns, or liability, like we were talking about earlier. So we've talked about some of the negative examples of conflicts, but what, in your eyes, are some of the best examples of cooperation between cities and private tech companies? Maybe the silence is the answer.
Wayfinding. There's a company called, now it's called Action Figure, which is sort of funny, but it used to be called Transit Screen. Yeah, no, I didn't.
Action Figure?
That's the appropriate reaction as far as I'm concerned. I didn't rename it, but what they did, this company was founded about 10 years ago, but they basically you guys know what GTFS is? It's like the data flow from transit, so you know when the next train or bus is coming. It's like data flows have been available for about 15 years. Basically brought that in, captured availability of Uber and Lyft, brought in information about where the nearest available bike is from a given place, when the next bus was going to arrive, here or there. So basically, all these data flows came into TV screens or just screens that could be placed at stadiums to help people figure out like which way to go if they want to take bike share after a baseball game, or if they want to know when the next train or bus is going to arrive. It could be used in lobbies of apartment buildings and office buildings. And this company, which has done okay, it's like it's gotten some venture capital money. It's not blowing things crazy, but it's actually it's a stable, successful company that has provided a very useful technology that a lot of cities have ended up adopting themselves and installing within city buildings, and also introducing the startup to lots of other entities or property owners in a city to basically improve pedestrian flows. So everybody wants better wayfinding. I think this is a great example of how technology can provide a useful service that improves the flow of mobility.
Yeah, I would say the same as trip planning apps, something like Transit app, right? So it's the same thing on your phone. They work very closely with cities that you can, imagine what it used to be like just a few years ago when you didn't have that ability to walk out your door and say, I need to get here. Look at all the different modes. They have bike directions in there now. They're doing a really good job at kind of adapting to what users need to get around, and that's a big part of our mega event quandary. Metro is talking about doing things like bundling tickets with your Metro pass, for example. They've done something like that at whatever, I say it might not be a tap card, whatever kind of pass. They've done it with the Hollywood Bowl, for example, where you buy a ticket and it says, oh, do you want to take the subway? Do you want to take, and we'll pick you up from the Red Line. Do you want to take a charter bus that we have available for you? And it incentivizes you to think differently about how you get to the place before you even look for parking at SoFi, which I've never even done because it just seems an impossible thing to do. And the website is sponsored by Shell Oil Company to get your parking directions, so you know what they want you to do when you get to the website. So if we can try to get people to make these types of decisions before they leave the house and have technology intervene in a way that lays out all the options and maybe even lets you pay for it, that is a really great tool that we can hopefully see in the next few years more.
What about you, John?
Well, it goes back to the seamlessness question. Look, I think, again, I said I'm a techno-optimist, but there's so many examples. If you look at, for example, there was a small LA-based startup a couple of years ago called Drover, and they developed a small module that you could attach to your shared rented electric scooter, which would automatically detect if you went onto the sidewalk. So I think it was GPS based. So if you went on the sidewalk, it would automatically decrease the top speed you could do to like 2 miles an hour or something to render it less dangerous. Or if you entered a zone where there were children, families, it would automatically decrease the speed you're able to go on. And it's now kind of almost on every vehicle of that type, and it's a small little thing, but it's super important. It makes it overnight much more safe and acceptable, I think. So it's a kind of small technology that company went out of business, but I'm not sure.
But A for effort.
But A for effort, yeah.
Right.
But I think because they
live on in our panel.
They didn't have watertight control of the IP. I think that so it's just yeah.
And then before we turn to questions, John, I'm curious too, and others chime in as well. What are the ingredients for success in partnerships between, emerging tech companies and public officials? I know that this is the heart of CoMotion. What needs to be there?
I would push back on something you said, David, and that is I don't think that public officials go for the latest new shiny object, because I think they're really budget constrained. I don't think they're as technologically savvy. I don't think that's actually quite the case. What's an ideal? Well, I think one thing, for example, that came out of LA, and many of you might be aware of this, but it followed the really important seminal work that came out of the LA Department of Transportation in 2016, which was a study called Urban Mobility in the Digital Age. Mm-hmm. And that looked at, it was way ahead of its time, and it looked at the way data can be managed to manage transportation much more successfully. And that led to the launch of something called mobility data specifications, MDS. And now this curb data specification, which is an open source system that allows a city and operators like Uber or delivery operators or people using the curb to kind of communicate back and forth. And so changes in public policy saying, okay, we got to close these streets because there's a demo or there's a flooding or something, it's automatically communicated. You can change kind of very dynamic changes in micro policy. I think that's really important. It's a good example of sort of public and private working together to, for sort of a better street, so to speak.
Any other final thoughts before turning to questions?
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate the feedback. You say that John was saying that he's not familiar with cities having the money or the wherewithal to actually make decisions based on wanting to be the first. So maybe I can give an example and also draw in that, if I can do this cogently, also offer suggestions on what I think should be done. And we're in California, so I'll pick on another city, San Jose. Some of you may be familiar with this, that a couple of years ago, San Jose did an RFP to find a transportation solution to connect its airport and its main train hub. So there were a lot of suggestions put forth. It's exactly the kind of situation that I was thinking of with John. Suggestions put forth to create BRT, to created like a train service, so streetcar line, people suggested. But the city didn't do that. The city gave the contract with the airport authority to a startup founded by some engineers called Glideways. Anybody know about these guys?
I remember this.
It is an autonomous shuttle company that, where the founder, by the way, said that nobody rides BART because BART is a disaster. You can find this, this is actually in the announcement in Bloomberg when they got the contract. And with these shuttles, it'll be right-of-way dedicated for these autonomous shuttles that will bring, they're pods, like personal rapid transit, bring people 4 at a time between the train hub and the airport. It basically makes BRT impossible, by the way. And it will move far, far fewer people at a much higher cost per person.
What does it make BRT impossible?
I'm sorry?
What does it make BRT impossible?
Oh, it takes up the right-of-way space that you would need to be able to create the BRT lane.
BRT, bus rapid transit.
Bus rapid transit, yeah. And what's interesting about the announcement from the city, it's like, why are we doing it? You can go find the quotes, is the person who was overseeing, the head of, I can't remember if it was the airport authority or with the city, said, we think this is an exciting solution and we're so excited, particularly because San Jose is going to be the first to do it. So that's what I mean, John, when I say don't do that.
I think that's the exception that proves the rule. Frankly,
I don't. John, all right.
I mean, Glideways happens to be based in San Jose, so it was like they wanted to support their own.
Okay, and now they're doing it in Atlanta. So this is and it's the same exact thing where the Atlanta airport folks, you can find the videos online saying we're so excited to be the first in the South to have this. So don't do that, is my advice to anyone who's a public official. Like, focus on defining the problem and then figure out what the solution really is to the problem. And maybe it's a technology, maybe it is an innovative technology, but a lot of the time, I think it's going to be, investing appropriately in something like a dedicated line for transit that has worked really well all around the world for a long time.
We'll let you two settle that during happy hour and finally fully duke it out. But any final?
Well, I want to maybe bring it back to PCH because I went to this great talk this morning. Vicki organizes Data and Donuts at Lacey, if you ever have been. And this morning we had Ryan Snyder from Caltrans talk about the new safety plans for PCH, right? And they were supposed to debut the next level of engagement on January 7th, so they haven't done that yet. They've delayed it for a few weeks, but he was able to show us some of the plans, and part of it was, Pepperdine was a key part of all the conversations and the deaths that had happened tragically, but also evacuations. Because people there are very worried about being able to get out, and as we see the same photos every time we have a fire up there, and these were the scariest ones yet, where people were leaving their cars behind and climbing out of them and running for their lives as a fire was chasing them down. It was more closer down, like by sunset. But this is going to happen again, and we have to think of new ways to move around the city. And it was great to hear Caltrans thinking so progressively about how much we need to make these changes, and having something like a very wide bike path on the side of the road that could double as an emergency vehicle right of way, or could be a way for people to get out without their cars. Vicki had this great idea, said let's give everybody in Malibu an e-bike and say, hey, if you really need to get out, here's another way to get out. So thinking about the plans as you start to see what Caltrans is proposing here, and one of the most popular ideas in the outreach was like a national park type of a solution where you had buses that got people to the beaches back and forth, fewer cars, wider sidewalks, more shade trees, and a really great safe bike lane that's completely protected. So if that's how Caltrans can be thinking about the problem, especially with everything we've been through, and these residents of Malibu can start to see how safety can be a part of their lives in multiple ways and also in disasters, that's what we really need to move towards. So I'm feeling good at that. Maybe we've turned the corner in thinking about these conversations, and we can see real solutions in sight.
Thank you. Well, let's open it up for any questions we have. We'll start right here in front.
Who has the microphone? No.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Two questions. First one, how did you get here? Second one, do you think we have the technology in our toolbox today that, if applied, could fix our transportation issues?
I walked from a hotel. Then I flew to the hotel. I don't know. Depends how far back you go.
Yeah.
Sorry. Feel free, anybody wants to jump in.
I took the 16 bus, but then I had to go to Lacey first, so I had to take another bus to get back here. But anyway, I think, yes. I mean, we don't need that much more technology. We need more steadfast leadership.
Yes,
I don't think the bus example is a really good example. The part that's important is not necessarily the camera, it's the paint. The red paint that says this is a bus lane. And city of LA has only really come around to the idea that maybe if we did that, things would go better, and create an actual network, things would go better. So I think we have more technology than we maybe need, but we just need better leadership.
I second what Alyssa said.
I came here in my beat-up old electric car.
Yeah.
I could have taken public transit, I suppose, and so I feel a little guilty about that.
Confession at the transportation conference. Yeah.
Right.
I'm the same. I had a similar experience to Nolan, so
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the lively discussion. It is a good panel. When I think about this, I look to draw a distinction between innovation and technology, and we've been talking a lot about technology, but I want to focus on innovation for a moment and expand that to also include social, political, cultural, along with technology. And David, if we're looking to define what the problem is, if we're solving for lovable, safe, convenient cities, but as part of cities is the mobility patterns, what might be some of the paradigm shifting innovation, including social and political and cultural, that might get us there? About that digital infrastructure, I have never heard of Action Figure. And I actually took a multimodal trip here. I rode my bike from West Hollywood to the Red Line, took the Red Line down here, and then from 7th Street took my bike again. And that trip took me 35 minutes. When I was looking on Google Maps this morning, driving, and that doesn't include walking to the parking spot that I was at, and then parking here, driving was estimated at 25 minutes, and transit was estimated at an hour and 12 minutes, and biking alone was estimated at 52 minutes. So knowing the city a little bit got me here in 35 minutes, but I do think we need digital solution that is able to suggest the multimodal trips. But yeah, handing it over to you guys around what might be the most paradigm-shifting innovation if we include not just technical solutions.
Well, first of all, I can take that sort of start. First, I think you're exactly right to push back against the conflation of innovation and technology. That happens all the time, and I think it's a mistake. We shouldn't do that. And we could spend a lot of time talking about cultural, political innovations. So, and I won't bore you with it or even attempt, but I'll offer one interesting idea of innovation in the political sense that applies to transportation, which I find very powerful, and I continue to like the idea of bringing to the US, but it's the idea from Central Europe, Germany and Switzerland, called Verkehrsverbunds. And these are basically regional coordination entities that have been created in Switzerland and Germany to sort of take over all of these kind of parochial individual transit systems in, say, Greater Munich or Greater Frankfurt. Put them all under one umbrella, and you basically coordinate at that point to ensure that schedules are aligned, to ensure that you're optimizing service for regional coordination purposes, and you're getting past the problems that, frankly, the Bay Area is famous for, with how many transit services? Like 23 transit agencies in the Bay Area, and everybody always complains that like the timelines are not coordinated, but when you try to to get them to coordinate, somebody always says, no, but wait, that'll cost us a little bit more money, and the whole idea falls apart. So the Verkehrsverbunds, actually, the genius of it is not just to create that regional structure, but with national money, actually, the Verkehrsverbunds were able to fill in individual budget gaps for the systems that faced slightly higher expenses due to the regional coordination. So it was sort of like being held harmless.
Do they work with public and private? Or is it just public agencies?
This is the innovation here began with the coordination of the public agencies.
Right.
Like again, Bay Area is such a good example of it. But then they're able to have a much deeper coordination with the private entities as well, which I think is very powerful. So basically, if you can empower regional governance in transportation, you're on the right path, is what I would say.
And now we all have a good German word that we can use for our
To
next.
impress people.
Yeah.
I'll go back to land use because I think that's something we just did. Other panels talked about that, but we had something in the city called ED1. Well, we still have it, but it was basically streamlining for affordable housing developments. It was really got a lot of housing built really quickly and approved really quickly, and some stuff got built in lightning fast amounts of time. And if you are on a transit corridor, everything that Lindsay was talking about, with what she's doing in livable communities, you were even more incentivized to build bigger and add more affordable units. Then the city kind of walked it back and said, actually, you can't put it in single-family neighborhoods. We were just joking. So that's the innovation, I guess, this very simple innovation. We've had multiple rounds where we're supposed to be adding more zoning capacity in some of these neighborhoods, and it keeps getting defeated by our council. So it's just a basic one, but that's pretty obvious. Put more housing in the single-family neighborhoods, which are largely wealthier neighborhoods. But also looking at, in a broader sense, LA now has something called La Casa, which is a housing authority. It's like the metro of housing. We voted for Measure A and approved it, which is going to deliver a lot of money, the same way that Measure M was a really big deal for transit. This is money for housing. And so we can think regionally on a very broad scale about where we want to put social housing and affordable housing and different types of family housing in neighborhoods, especially after all of this destruction. People are going to need to move to safer places. So how can we figure out how to get people out of some of these high fire risk corridors and move them into a welcoming environment in the middle of the city that's transit rich and a great place to live?
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said about reimagining what progress looks like. We talked about automation searching for a problem, and what do we want our cities to look like is something that's special.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. Vicky, you had your hand up of Data and Donuts fame.
Actually, I have a request of John, which is, I've been in Commotion many years. My team authored the mobility data specification, also some other specifications Our software is consistently on different main stages. This year I facilitated an event, and I ride an e-bike. And this year again, there's no parking. And to add insult to injury, when I was leaving the event, the official shuttles were parked in a row, no drivers, lights on, very large, blocking all of the eastbound traffic in the bike lanes all the way out. So it was very disappointing, I think, for a lot of us to be at an event that's focused on this, and some of that messaging is right, but the execution has consistently really not followed through. So my ask of you is next year that your team prioritize those of us who are not using the sort of subsidized private sector, free shuttles or subsidized Lyft or Waymo rides, but for those of us who own a private bike who want to be able to securely lock that during the conference session.
Well, thank you for that. We will definitely take that into consideration, guys. One of the reasons why we hold the event in Little Tokyo is because it is such a great node of public transit, and so a lot of people do come on Metro to Commotion, I'm proud to say, and we hope that number increases in the future. But thank you for that. We'll definitely look at that.
I realize we're at time. I want to thank all of our panelists for the discussion. Sign up for Torch, sign up for David's newsletter, sign up for the Commotion newsletter, and attend Commotion.
I have a newsletter. I didn't mention it.
Yeah.
Stickers.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
No.
We'll get you on the swag game. We'll send you. Yeah. And thank you to Pete and the School of Public Policy for hosting
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
Round of applause for all of them. Thank you.